Delirium, or the fanatical obsession with one's view of spirituality. This is part of the Spiritual Problems series by Dr. Lisa Love. So delirium is one of the 4 Ds that are primarily influencing Group 7 probationary disciples. And this information comes from the book Esoteric Psychology 2 by Alice Bailey, pages 598 to 607. And we've already done a video on devitalization, which is pursuing spirituality in an impractical way. Delusion, which is the love of fantasy or mystical visions, versus reality, which is going further on the spiritual path to understand the real. Delirium, which we're going to look at in this video, which is a fanatical obsession with one's view of spirituality. In another video to come, detachment, misguided withdrawal from the world. So if you're already familiar with the Soul to Spirit YouTube channel, you know this idea of chutes and ladders drawn from the old game Snakes and Ladders. And the idea is that we don't, in spiritual development, neatly go through this stage and this stage and this stage and this stage without difficulties as we just zoom our way up the spiritual path. No, what happens instead is that there are gaps, what the Bailey books call cleavages, in our development, which means we may be going along and then we've had a realization of some sort that's taken us up here to the next stage very quickly, as if we've skipped these steps. But because we skipped these steps, it's very likely that as we continue to go a little further, we're suddenly sent back down to repeat the steps that we've missed. And that's what these gaps in development are. And that's why something like delirium will happen as well. So for example, we may have, here we are, we've gone here, we've gotten to here, and we may have a sudden realization, maybe it's a mystical experience, maybe it's a drug experience, something that makes us think we've gone all the way up here, which we have, but it's only temporary. Why? Because we've missed all this stuff here. And so what that means is we go just a few stages more and suddenly we go down this chute and we're all the way back just a few stages behind where we started because we skipped way too many steps and we had to fall back down and go through the process in a steady, organized fashion. That's what these cleavages are that cause spiritual problems in our development. We must learn how to complete, whether we want to or not, all of the little steps along the way. But most of us don't do that. We go up and down in our development, which is fine. That's just how humanity is. But for those of us who don't go through those stages in the appropriate way, we may experience something like delirium. Now, as I'm writing this video in 2024 and producing it, delirium is actually becoming a serious problem in our world. It's not just a few people experiencing this. It's more and more people experiencing delirium, including people in very high positions of power. So let's go over what delirium is and really get a good grasp on it, because that's the only way we're going to solve what's becoming a pretty serious problem in humanity at this time. So our first video on devitalization spoke about the difficulties of not living a balanced life in both the material and spiritual worlds. Go back and watch that video if you want to learn more. The second video on delusion addressed the concerns of getting too caught up in mystical experiences, making state experiences the end goal of spiritual life instead of service to the plan that benefits the spiritual development of all people of our planet as a whole. So if devitalization, where there's an imbalance between the spiritual and material worlds, and delusion, where we're overemphasizing mystical experiences or state experiences, we might call them prophecy experiences, over service to the whole, then the end result is going to be a more severe spiritual problem, delirium. Now, that word to me, delirium, is kind of a strange word. I mean, what does that mean? So I looked up what it means, and in the dictionary, it is defined as a disturbed state of mind or consciousness, especially an acute, transient condition associated with fever, intoxication, characterized by symptoms such as confusion, agitation, disorientation, and hallucinations. Delirium is also defined as wild excitement or ecstasy. The Latin roots of the word, I discovered, also imply that there is a deviation away from the norm. I guess, the word normal, what is that? I like to consider it being healthy, sane way of living in the world. So there's a deviation away from that. It can also be a deviation from the norm of people at the time, so this person in delirium seems too odd or out of there. Though today delirium is thought to be the result of a medical condition, as Bailey defines delirium, it's really an outgrowth of people believing they have a personal connection to God, combined with what we would now call personality disorders, leading to serious personal and even planetary consequences if left unchecked. So let's get an understanding of how Bailey actually defined it in her book, and then I'm going to expand on this a little bit in this video. Bailey states a person becomes delirious when he or she gets to a point of the spiritual path where, quote, he has no real inner control, and note Bailey uses only the masculine pronoun here because when she lived, that is what everyone did. Everybody was a he in every book everywhere, so don't let it trigger you. So, where he has no inner control, he develops the mystical sense to the point where he has no sense of proportion, where the conventions, right or wrong, social training, economic responsibility, human obligations in all aspects of daily life, which integrate the human part into the whole of humanity, fail to police the lower nature. His outer expression becomes abnormal, and he, from the highest and best sense of values, antisocial. Such an antisocial attitude will range all the way from a relatively usual fanaticism, which forces its possessor to see only one point of view out of the many possible, to certain pronounced and recognizable forms of insanity. The mystic is then obsessed by his own peculiar thought form of truth and of reality. He has only one idea in his head. His mind is not active, for his brain has become the instrument of his astral nature and registers only his fanatical devotion and his emotional obsession. And that's pages 602 to 603. And when we say astral nature, what we're talking about is a mind that is consumed by desire and emotions and is very reactive and is not able to engage in more reason or more critical thinking skills. Bailey goes on to say that if this tendency is not caught early on, it can even lead to, quote, strenuous one-pointedness, real fanaticism, sadistic effort with a supposed spiritual motive, such as was seen in the Inquisition, and certain forms of mental breakdown, and that's on page 603. So there was a lot of information in those quotes. Let's tease it out a little bit. It's going to seem a little repetitious here, but it's going to help anchor what she's saying in our brains. So let's look at it again, some of her key words. And her exact words from her quote are in green here. I'm going to elaborate on it a little bit. So she says they develop the mystical sense to the point where he or she has no sense of proportion. Well, to me, this means that can often lead them to believing they are God's messenger somehow. And so we have people who get mystical visions, and therefore they become chosen by God. We're going to get into this in more detail, so I don't want to get too elaborate here. Or they have a prophecy that makes them feel that they're an apostle suddenly, something like that, where they're God's messenger. 2, things that normally help them fit into society as a whole behind their tribal group, the norm of their tribal group, such as conventions of right or wrong, social training, economic responsibility, human obligations, and all aspects of the daily life, fail to police their lower nature. And we're going to get into that more in just a little bit. The antisocial attitude exists that on the mild side means they're a nuisance to a few people around them, and on the extreme side can make them, like in the Inquisition, a danger to the human race. For a relatively usual fanaticism, which, her words again, forces its possessor to see only one point of view of the many possible, and her words, to certain pronounced and recognizable forms of insanity, which can lead to fanaticism and a sadistic effort with a supposed spiritual motive, such as what was seen in the Inquisition, as with cult leaders today. So I've given you a little preview of what the rest of the video is going to talk about as I break this down into 3 specific categories for us. So here we have what I've called Delirium, the Mild Fanatic, kind of drawing from her quote into different categories. The mild form of delirium I've called the mild fanatic, who grabs a hold of a particular philosophical, religious, or spiritual point of view and believes that teaching is totally infallible and everyone should follow it to the letter. Now that is even found, mild fanatics, within the Bailey teachings. It's found in every different teaching where somebody has this problem of delirium. This is essentially the fundamentalist type who rigidly holds on to a literal interpretation of their chosen text or point of view. Nothing can be changed. No one can have an alternate discussion about it. This person believes they have the exact truth and it must be followed to the letter. Though we would most likely see fundamentalists in groups 3, 4, and 5. And if you're not aware of what that means, get more familiar with it on the Soul to Spirit channel. But basically, the leaders of these fundamentalist groups are found most often in Group 7 probationary disciples. Why? Because they have gone through the stage of Group 6 aspirant, where they have learned to accumulate power, pleasure, and money for themselves, and are combining it with the mystical tendencies of Group 7 probationary disciples, who are tapping into primarily the astral realm, having mystical visions, feeling that they're channeling information, etc. Having come out of Group 6 as integrated personalities, they then often combine, those in Group 7, combine prosperity doctrines with channeling or visions or prophecies. And here's the problem with it. They don't use that with an open mind to say, oh, that's interesting. I had this vision. I had this channeling experience. Watch the video on delusion for more understanding of this. They don't just let it go there. I've had that. That's interesting. They take it even further. They use it so that they can get more power by becoming on the mild side righteous and on the dangerous side the chosen one of God. That's going to, like in the Inquisition, impose their view on everybody else. Also, as the Group 7 probationary disciple level, or at the Group 7 probationary disciple level, they're more able to think in metaphors and to read symbols than in Groups 3, 4, and 5. But they tend to believe only in their interpretation of symbols and signs and are not open to the interpretation of others. That's the mild fanatic. I interpret this text and the symbolism of this text in my way only. I'm not willing to have an open discussion. Why? Because I'm the chosen one of God, or I believe that I'm superior in my intellect and ability than anybody else, and therefore I'm going to insist that I am right and you are wrong. Now, the mild fanatic can be a pain, and unless you agree with them, you can at least avoid them or walk away or just agree to disagree or something. But that's more difficult with what I consider to be the next stage of delirium, the zealot, which is a more severe stage. And here are some keywords I found describing a zealot. And I'm not going to read all these here. I'll just read a few. You can pause the video if you really want to read them, but they're bigoted, extreme, full of hate, intolerant, they're biased, they're dogmatic, they can be too forceful in their opinions, they can become manic, hyper, insisting that everybody follow their path, obstinate, prejudiced, rage-filled, etc., superstitious. They can become violent. Obviously, we can see how the zealot is more of a problem than the mild fanatic. A zealot is often that really annoying fanatic who attempts to convert people, or that family member or friend who insists on making you see only their point of view. They don't just say it, they keep at you and at you and at you with it. Or someone who chases after and even harasses people on social media to convert them, but does it in a way that lacks social training, as Bailey calls it. They don't care about that. They just care about pushing and forcing their views on everybody else. And I said in 2024, when I'm writing this is becoming more of a problem. It's becoming that problem around the world. Now, I'm in the United States, but you can see that in our government, where certain people aren't willing to legislate and compromise and listen and talk and dialogue anymore. They are going to force and insist. This is the zealot that has the problem of delirium, that you follow my way. Why? Because I'm part of the chosen kingdom of God, which at this country in this the United States at this time is primarily popping up as Christians, but it can be Muslims, or it can be Jews or Hindus or Buddhist or whatever. You can get a zealot in each and every faith tradition. Now, zealots can be very difficult to deal with. They can make you kind of crazy, but they're not nearly as dangerous as what I'm calling the cult leader. So Bailey was talking in her quote about those that create the Inquisition. They're in a way zealots at the Inquisition, but they can also be part of following a cult, who is a leader who proclaims, at the time of the Inquisition, that was like Pope, who proclaims certain things. Let's look at what a cult leader is. And though the zealot is problematic, they are nothing compared to the difficulties and dangers that arise when the individual becomes the cult leader. That is where the problems of delirium, which Bailey called the disturbed state of mind that wants to set itself apart from others, is exacerbated by what in modern psychology we call personality disorders. Now, there are a number of personality disorders, but with the cult leader, 3 especially apply. Now, when Bailey wrote this, like 80 years ago, we didn't have the modern system of personality disorders and modern psychiatry and psychology. But the cult leader has 3 of them, of which Bailey does mention 1. So, cult leaders have a little bit of what they call schizotypal personality disorder, in which a person has unusual thoughts and ways of behaving and speaking. They are also uncomfortable having close relationships with others, and in the case of the cult leader, they can collect a multitude of followers around them, but they're not close with really any of them. So what is that? Unusual thoughts and ways of behaving and speaking would be the fact that they believe that they're channeling God, or that people have demons in them. These kinds of things are going on. Now, Bailey does mention antisocial characteristics with delirium, and cult leaders tend to have antisocial personality disorder, in which a person has a long-term pattern of manipulating, exploiting, or violating the rights of others. And most cult leaders have this. Now, antisocial, that word can sound like we want to stay away from people. That is going to be Bailey's 4th D, detachment. That is not as dangerous as delirium. And the antisocial personality disorder, that she has the word antisocial in there, better describes what antisocial really is. It means you are manipulating, exploiting other people for your own personal gains, and you don't care what happens to them as you do it. Then they have the narcissistic personality disorder, in which a person lacks empathy but wants to be admired by others. And they think they're better than others and that they deserve special treatment. And this is the most dominant personality disorder in cult leaders, who have now combined mystical and state experiences with their selfish tendencies to make them special messengers of the divine. So because the cult leader is becoming such a problem, let's articulate a few more characteristics. Some of this will be repetitive. For example, the main one again is that they are narcissistic, which means they see themselves as the self-appointed chosen ones who need constant praise, can't admit to any mistakes, and create dependencies on others and insist that everyone follow only them. They are charismatic. They project confidence that because they are chosen or superior, they are the only ones in the know or who can fix it or save people. They are authoritarian. They maintain strict control of others, dictating their beliefs, behaviors, and punishing them for becoming non-believers. No one can question their authority, and they get people to live in fear a lot as well. They are antisocial. They lack empathy. They put people down. They dehumanize others. They see people as tools only for their own gain. Along with antisocial, they also believe that they are better than everyone and have rights others do not have. They expect absolute loyalty and can become paranoid of others who might take their power away. They exaggerate. They repeat lies over and over until they say them enough that other people start to think they must be true. They gaslight people, telling them that the sky is clear when it's raining outside, and try and get you to not use your own rational or critical thinking skills to really believe your own eyes or to think appropriately about what's really going on. They exploit people financially, sexually, emotionally, and get people to prioritize their interest over their own well-being. And they are infallible. They can't admit to their mistakes, while at the same time, they tend to live by a double standard where they can break rules, standards, and norms others cannot. So now that we've looked at Bailey's text, and I've taken her text and divided it into Mild Fanatic, Zealot, and Cult Leader, how do we stop delirium? Well, for the most part, the only way to prevent and handle delirium is to stop those who have delirium from gaining power. Because once the person with delirium is enabled by those around them, usually those in groups 3, 4, and 5, of which the masses of humanity belong to, and we give those with delirium power, the only way out is to dismantle their power, isolate them, and force them to look at their misguided behavior. As I see it then, delirium is not so much an individual problem in terms of prevention, it's a societal one. Zealots and cult leaders need their followers, or else they would remain just annoying, mild fanatics who refuse to cultivate a more open mind. The problem is that the majority of humanity, again, comprises groups 3, 4, and 5 who have Atlantean consciousness and emotional desire-based focus and are still partially magical and mostly mythological in their thinking. That means they look for superheroes, gods, or avatars with magical powers who will magically remove all their troubles and woes. Because it will still take a long time for groups 3, 4, and 5 to evolve and not empower those who are group 7 probationary disciples who have psychological issues. Delirium may be with us for a long time. So the only way out of delirium is really to understand it and to educate ourselves and others about it. And this cartoon is meant to remind us that fanaticism or delirium can happen in any faith tradition, including esoteric communities or spiritual communities. Again, as I'm writing this video in 2024, delirium seems to be on the rise. And cult leaders are coming into positions of power everywhere around the globe. Some of these cult leaders are Group 7 probationary disciples who sincerely believe in their visions and want to use them to enhance their access to power, pleasure, and money. Others are Group 6 materialists who don't have visions and technically do not fall into the category of delirium, but who are using those who are delirious, those who have a religious or spiritual bias, I should say. They're using those people who claim to have mystical visions and prophecies so that they can jump on board to exploit financially, sexually, in all ways, those in groups 3, 4, and 5, so that those in group 6 and group 7 who have delirium can have more power, pleasure, and money. To recruit people into these cults, those with delirium tend to flatter them, make them feel chosen or special, grift off them, and separate them out into tribal groups. There they get people to surrender any ability to objectively reason about the mystical visions or prophecies that are being given to them. As cult members are devitalized and become subject to delusion, see those videos on the Soul to Spirit YouTube channel, more people then can be recruited in the future into becoming delirious, fanatical zealots and cult leaders. That is why education on the 4Ds is so important for the masses, so that we can inoculate ourselves and them from being used and abused by delirious types everywhere. So thanks for watching this brief video describing delirium. Again, this is part of the Spiritual Problems series that applies mainly to Group 7 probationary disciples. If you want to know more about them, subscribe to this YouTube channel or hit the little bell so you'll be alerted when new videos come out. And as usual, I'm going to roll the credits here and encourage you to become a patron, where you can get certain perks when you do, as well as visit our website. And most important, subscribe to this YouTube channel, like, comment, share, hit the bell for alerts, and thanks for watching.